Hey, hello.
I guess it is happening.
We are, yeah.
Great things come in twos. There's Homer and Marge, Jerry and George,
I have
Bob
to
and
leave
Burgers.
and then come back.
Now there's a duo you're gonna
Kill
love,
my
Premium
music.
and Hulu. Get both together and you'll enjoy ad-free offline music, plus thousands of hit movies and
What was that?
He said he had to leave and go. Oh yeah, with the sound and everything. How are you today? You got a cold?
Yeah, the last 3-4 days I've been pretty bad. Like, I mean, physically it's fine. It's just all in the head and all of congestion and coughing. And this morning, like since 8 o'clock or so, I've started to clear up, but I barely could sleep the last couple of nights. I could barely keep my eyes open. If I tried to read a page or look at a screen, I would start tearing and my eyes closing up and everything.
Wow, and you still showed up. That's commitment.
Well, I don't know if I'll stay. I wanted to at least see what was going on, see if others would show up, and if a conversation gets going and I don't need to participate in it, then I probably prefer to listen, or just turn off the camera or something and listen in, and then respond later. I don't know if I'm in the best shape to contribute.
Maybe not.
But there's been a lot of chatter on the interwebs, and Katina has been posting, Ed has been posting, Mark as well. There's been more discussion on the mindful sex topic,
right?
And gender, sex and gender discussion. And of course, that's in the news now because of the Brett Kavanaugh hearings.
Huge.
Yeah, and I know that Mark has been following that. I haven't really followed it that closely, but I haven't escaped it either. So if that was something that was on the table to discuss, I don't know that I have any well-formed thoughts about it necessarily, but this would be the time and place to discuss it. I do wish Katina joined because she's got some impassioned perspectives on the subject, which are not coming from a typical place, let's just say. But I haven't even read through them all yet. I just started looking at them a little while ago, and but if you guys want to talk, we can talk sex politics.
Easy topics.
I mean, let's frame the conversation and see where we want to go with it. There may be other things.
I have a point of procedure, maybe. I'm still having a really hard time finding my way around this maze that is infinite conversations. Like I didn't know this was happening. I just took a chance and went back and found a Zoom link, and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And maybe that's why people aren't here.
Well, yeah, we didn't create a post for it. We didn't create an event for it. So it was this is just the regular time, but
well, I have a couple ideas for future, because I'm an idea guy, not an action guy. Just to be honest about it, I have a couple good ideas for future Cosmos cafes that I'm quite interested in. So maybe I could share. Well, one in particular would be to invite a living teacher named Samuel Bonder to come for a Cosmos Cafe and talk about his work. I've been finding his work really helpful, and I don't think he knows about infinite conversations. And
okay.
So it's just a thought. So I'm just.
Yeah, we should talk about that because there may be some conflicts of interest involved. I've been doing. Well, Kayla and I did their website when it was.
Oh.
And Saniel, without going into the details, so Saniel Wander started a organization called Waking Down,
Right.
sort of like a distributed community of spiritual practitioners.
Yes.
But he had us parting from them. But we did
Right.
their website, and then we continued to work with the organization that came out of that, called Trillium Awakening.
Right.
That may be fine. I'm happy to talk with anybody, and I'm happy to be here. I'm just saying that
No.
that would potentially be a sort of friction point.
Okay.
Either for them,
right,
or for him.
Yeah, these small communities, lots of politics as well, and stuff to deal with. I had my something yesterday too, not getting funding. I told you about that I was upset about. And
yeah, that's what Café is for. It's for having conversations
about challenging topics, right?
Yeah, that's what it's for.
All right.
So we could talk. I mean, maybe we should talk about what we're going to talk about today, but also to address Mark's point. So the thing is,
how's that from that?
Started doing the cafes because I wanted to get this kind of thing going, but I don't want it to be my job every week to make it happen, because I have to do other things too. And I want to be able to set up kind of the system and then the template, like this is how you do it. Here's where you put a post, and here's how it gets on the calendar, and here's how to do the recording, and here's how to upload it. The more automated, the better, so that anybody, like any member of Cosmos, could start a Cosmos Cafe and do it at any time. And there may be like a regular time like this one that happens from week to week, but then somebody needs to step up on a weekly basis and kind of host it, or somebody needs to be like the coordinator or the barista, if you will, or the host. I think, yeah, like it could be a general template, sort of the franchise model. Like there could be cafe franchises that look at different topics or different times when people are available. But it's not really clearly set out at this point, because it's been very organic, and it's just been showing up on a regular basis. And sometimes there's topics and sometimes there aren't, and sometimes there are topics but they don't get formed into like a specific thing. Like we were talking about the sex and gender stuff, and that's in the news and that's been discussed on the forum, but nobody took it and said, let's do a cafe about it. However, except for Durwin, because that was I mean, I think that Katina's her writing is not directly in response to this. Like I pointed her to the cafe that we did a few months back,
mm-hmm.
but it picks up on the same thread, and it's in the news now. So somebody would have to say, let's talk about this again, and make sure that the invitation goes out. But I've been sick, and I've been trying to get other things going, because like the cafe will be supported by the co-op, and the forum has to work and so forth. And part of my activity in is communicating like what I think, like getting little groups together and forming like a council, or forming circles to take ownership, I guess, of these pieces, and then at another level we'd have to integrate them. And so that's what we've been trying to work on with the Cosmos co-op level things. So anyway, apologies for the for the confusion, but that also perhaps makes it fun, because if you don't know whether it's happening or not, and you show up, and it just might be one of the best conversations of your life. Not to overdetermine this particular conversation.
And Doug, I don't know what we do about Doug. I mean, he's like here and then he's gone. I don't know.
So
maybe
what's on your minds?
Oh, there's Durwin. Well,
Yeah,
I thought that was a good link you did, Marco, to the session we had about mindful sex, with what's in the news today. I mean, it really sort of links up. And then, which I think I mentioned in somewhere, I don't even know where, that what was happening current in the news with the Kavanaugh thing sort of encompasses all this stuff that we're talking about, because it's trying to, in the most public of forums, recreate something that happened 37 years ago. I mean, it's crazy, and it's about something we people don't ever want to talk about, and that's sex. If you put the word mindful in front of it, I don't know if that happens very often at all. And we really didn't get to it in that cafe. We got into your...
We didn't get to what, mindfulness? Or we
mindful sex. We got all... The guest you brought in was talking about a system she put forth about, assessing people's level of consciousness, sort of, and that tangentially, you can link that to mindful sex. Only people and I have to use Wilbur because I don't remember her color coding. Only people in teal have mindful sex. People like me in red and orange, we don't have mindful sex. But that's not, I'm joking. That's not exactly true. But anyway, it's just I've been fascinated by the public, position of all these, let's call them smart primates in the Senate. It's been fascinating. And it links into free will. You can just predict what they're going to say before they say it.
So am I understanding that you felt that because it was 37 years ago, it wasn't relevant, or it was related to repressed, or it's related to a general, or both? It's related to a general culture of sexual repression, or both?
I think it's extremely relevant in that, particularly to what we've been talking about, consciousness, memory, and mindfulness. I mean, like to try and recreate something that happened 37 years ago, and you see by all the supposed people who everybody's like backing away from it, saying, I don't recall that. And so we're talking about conscious, right there out in front of the public. People are talking about essentially consciousness, about, really, it's now go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, it's funny, but in graduate school, I actually worked with a psychologist, a cognitive scientist who is a specialist in memory of trauma, or he had done a lot of work in that area. So,
hey, before we move on, Durwin, do you have a microphone or something?
Oh, yeah.
Plug in, because you're a bit faint.
I'm too faint? Okay.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
And also, just to set context, if we're going to talk about this, let's refer back to the there was a previous cafe where Terry O'Fallon was the guest, and she presented on her framework of ego development, or ego evolution, her developmental framework. And in particular, though, Durwin, you hosted that cafe, and you wanted to look at sexuality through the lens of those levels, and make the point that it gets expressed differently depending on consciousness development.
And I guess the point, yeah, I guess I was hoping to say that in an integral community context, there hadn't been anyone doing any work in sort of developing an assessment around that, like, you know, some way to try to be more objective about it because it's so loaded. That was part of my intention of doing that.
Okay. And now we have this situation with Brett Kavanaugh, who is a nominee for the Supreme Court. He's testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee. I think they cleared him through the Judiciary Committee. Jeff Flake was the vote in this, who has been a fierce Trump critic, right? He's Jeff Flake from Arizona, the one that...
Is he Republican then?
He's a Republican, but he's been an anti-Trumpist. Nonetheless, to the great chagrin and rage, even, I think, of many women, not just women, just people that are reacting and responding to the situation, he voted to clear Kavanaugh through the Judiciary Committee. Where we're at now is that the Senate will have to vote on his on his nomination, but the FBI is doing a requested kind of additional background check. So there's a bunch of politics involved, basically, because Trump wants him through. Apparently, the Republicans want him through. He's a very significant seat because it would swing the court to a conservative majority, which many fear would enable them to undo landmark decisions like Roe v. Wade. So it has big implications for women's issues, women's health, etc. But those issues play into much, I think, larger and deeper conflicts and narratives around sexual morality, politics, consciousness. And I think, Durwin, you want to also say development. That's an important.
Yeah, sure.
So I before we get into this, though, I think we need to just get our politics out of the way, because, like, I don't, I would prefer he's not on the Supreme Court, and I just want to put that out right up front. Mark may feel differently.
Me too.
You may feel you're not even American, but
American.
me?
No, Durwin. He's not.
Oh.
He is North American, right? But not a United States citizen. So this
Are you a Canadian, Durwin? Yeah. So yeah, you don't have a.
We don't have a vote or a.
Yeah, you don't vote in this country.
Right.
So, but you do interact with women.
Definitely.
There are women in Canada, I think.
Yeah, there's some women.
Very spread out, but there. So what, Mark, do you have a horse in this race?
I don't think that, and maybe this is, quote, my white privilege, but the Supreme Court has never been something that I'm, one way or another. I think they're all incredibly smart. They write these opinions, but I was listening, they try and solve problems that can't be solved anywhere else. Things have to work their way up to it's the Supreme Court. And you have to bring something before it, you have to have standing, which means you're being aggrieved by some issue, and and it can't be resolved down the chain, and it works its way up to the Supreme Court. And these 9 judges sit there and they listen to arguments, pros and cons. And then I guess they go to the local pub or something and they kick it around and then they vote. And then one person writes the opinion that was carried, and it's pages and pages long, and then another one on the other side will write the dissenting opinion, and then it gets put into a book. And if you took all the decisions, it'd be a big library like my bookshelf here, full of all these previous decisions, and that's called precedent. And they lean on what judges before them decided. And I don't know, it's fascinating, but I'm into like depth psychology. I'm not into law that much. There was go ahead.
So are you saying that you're just not that concerned about it one way or the other, or?
I'm right. I'm more interested in the intellect and the personalities and things like that than which they make these huge decisions, but I don't see how they affect me. And again, that might be my white privilege.
But you follow the events, you follow it all. And you were involved, we don't have to get into the gruesome details, but you were involved in, the campaigns. You were a supporter of, one candidate and his policies. And so it's not, my sense is that you appreciate the spectacle of it and the drama because of everything you're saying. It's interesting. You don't feel personally implicated by the consequences or the implications of it. But you do have some care for the consequences and implications because it makes a difference whether that judge is on the more conservative side or the more liberal side, and whether he's going to more favor make decisions that are of benefit to some groups rather than others. So you're identifying with a particular group.
Which group am I identifying with? White male privilege.
Yeah. And admitting that it wouldn't really bother you one way or the other, whether he's nominated. It sounds like or whether he's appointed. It sounds like if he were appointed, you'd be okay with that. But you also recognize that a whole bunch of people aren't okay with that, and you care, and if you don't, then is it sufficient to you just to kind of rest in that?
Well, you said your position was you'd rather he not be there.
Right.
My position is I wouldn't have cared if it was Garland who got on, Obama's guy, or but that was different because that made it like 4-4 or something, and this is supposedly the swing vote.
Mm-hmm.
But again, these are all like super smart people, and they're well educated. So yeah, to me, who gets on the court, unless somehow the court is going to determine that jack-booted brown shirts are knocking on my door and haul me away to the death camp because I'm too old to be viewed as viable anymore. It doesn't affect me anymore. So Garland, I don't care. I didn't care about any of them. ever,
Mm-hmm.
other than that they're smart, intelligent people.
Okay. So maybe we could talk about the depth psychology of the situation, because that might be, I mean, I don't really want to argue politics. So,
Yeah,
and we could also welcome Ed. Hey, Ed.
Hi, guys.
there's my buddy.
How you feeling?
I'm feeling like hell. I managed to get my fall time cold, so I was deciding whether or not to go to bed or to do whatever. And I got a note from Duggins that you guys were online. Since I didn't see that anybody was going to be, I was leaning in the one direction, but I figured I can't miss this.
I'm just kidding. I've been miserably sick the last few days, and
Yeah,
just maybe this morning I could finally keep my eyes open.
yeah.
I could finally look at.
I get one when the season starts, spring and fall, and I'm okay. But I got to get through that one, so, which is really a little tricky because my wife had a nose operation today, so she can't afford to catch anything I might have. So I'm being banned to the North 40 for the duration. So, that's one of those things. But, it's just life.
Yeah, it comes and goes.
You're
Yeah.
in Germany, and are you also a U.S. citizen or?
Oh yeah. The thing about
dual
what a
citizen?
lot of people don't know is it's harder not to be a U.S. citizen than to be one. The way it works is if I decided I wanted to renounce my American citizenship, I can do that, and I have to fill out a whole bunch of paperwork, and then I have to pay about $3,000 in fees, and then I have to submit my tax returns for the last 10 years to make sure I don't owe them anything, and then they can say, okay, you can renounce it, but they reserve the right to recall that judgment anytime they feel fit. So if they saw, let's say in like 5 years, that maybe there was something that for whatever reason, maybe it is the brown shirted, jackbooted, whatever, they can just say, okay, well, we don't recognize that anymore. I mean, America's never been good at holding on to its commitments once it's made them. See the Iran deal, for example. So it's this whole, it's probably the worst bureaucratic mess you can possibly imagine. Costs a whole lot of money and doesn't really mean anything in the end. So I go, so what the hell? I'm here. I can't vote here because I'm not a citizen here. So
You mean you could be clawed back? They could claw you back in?
Yeah,
You could be clawed back? You could be clawed back into U.S. citizenship?
Yes. Yeah, there are actually precedent cases where they have said to people, you're no longer an American, and then they literally 5 years later said, no, we don't recognize that anymore, and charged them and issued arrest warrant, international arrest warrants to have them extradited back to the States. So if any of you are wondering why I'm not a big flag waving American, it's because I've seen it. What I believe is from its true side. I never believed the hype when I was there. That was my problem. I was not a good soldier when I was in the military, although I received the Army Commendation Medal and was put up for a warrant officer promotion. I know how to play games. So, but if they want you, they'll come and get you, and if they don't want you, they'll leave you alone. I'm fighting with the Social Security Administration at the moment because they didn't pay me my Social Security last month. So I had to get, listen to this, a certificate of existence that I could submit. Yeah. Okay. Yes. And so I get on in Germany. You guys know this, but in Germany, you're required to register when you reside anywhere. You have to go to the local mayor's office and say, I'm living in the community now, because the number of people that live there determines how much money they get from the federal government or the state government, this, that, and whatnot. which is fine with me. So they all know where you are all the time. You're registered. So I went down, and they said, you have to get onto the office there so you can get the certificate of existence. And so I went down there, and, I told the lady working there, I said, I need one of these. She goes, oh, yeah. And punched it into the computer and printed it out. She goes, we get these all the time. I said, really? He goes, yeah, we have lots of Americans that are living around here. And regularly they have to submit one because the Social Security Administration, for no known identifiable reason, simply assumes you're dead.
Oh.
And then you have to prove that you still exist.
Okay.
So that's also one of the pleasures of, living outside of the borders of the continental United States and their territories. Which are sometimes recognized or not. And it's just absolutely, positively bizarre. That's the only way I can describe it. So this is going through the mill. I'm really anxious because tomorrow is the day the payment shows up. And if it's not there, then I have to call the consulate, which you can only call 3 mornings a week. And you only, it's just the last time it took me 10 tries to get through. The time before that, it took me 12 to tell them, okay, I'm still not on the record, so they can keep pushing to get me reinstated as a denizen of the planet. So.
Yeah, well, okay. I just wanted to add one thing, and that is, speaking of bureaucracy and countries and citizenship, and there is actually something called BitNation, where they the blockchain, to where you can basically make your own country. Like seriously, they're actually doing this, and they've got funding.
Yeah, I'm sure they would. I mean, it's just I've never been a real big fan of citizenship because I don't really understand what it means.
It means you get a Social Security check.
Well, no, my wife gets one too. She's German.
She gets one from us?
Yes.
From us?
Yes.
I'm going to call my congressman.
Right. Yeah. This is. Yeah. She gets just like me. She gets a German pension and an American pension. Because we've earned them in both places. So when you earn them, you get them. That's all there is to it, as long as you're alive.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but it does. Like if I were living in the United States, I still would get my German pension because I earned it here. Of course, I would get it there. They would send it to the United States because I've worked long enough in both places. I don't have like the big pension. I have one from here, one from there. I have 2 of them because I worked, the Army in my 14 years in California, and the rest of the time I worked in Germany. So, my retirement gets put together out of lots of little things that come up. But which is fine. It's just sometimes, bureaucratically speaking, a bit of a problem because some people make arbitrary decisions. And America, oddly enough, tends to be, this was my experience in the military. Arbitrariness is like the rule of law. Things just happen for no reason at all. Nobody can explain it to you. Nobody knows why. I don't know. You were probably also in the military, Mark. At some point, you just don't get your pay. And nobody knows why they stopped paying it. Because you obviously weren't killed anywhere. I'm sitting in Germany. I've got the cushiest job in the world. I'm at the end of the free world in an office and wearing civilian clothes, but okay. But it just doesn't show up and you go, okay. And then, you show up and I had to go to Frankfurt, which is at the time was a 2-hour drive south. My VW Bug wasn't mine. That was the duty vehicle from the office I was in. We didn't have a Jeep. We had 2 VW Bugs because we didn't wear uniforms or anything. I was in a liaison office. My job was to make sure that the Germans liked us.
How'd you do?
I did real well. I can drink with the best of them, Mark. And that was basically the test of your mettle. So that's right. Yeah.
to loop this back around, you were not a sloppy drunk.
No. I could still collect intelligence in any state of any. It was really nice because, you know, we all have forms in order to. This is the thing about. Let me tell you a really bizarre story. The office I worked in, since it was military intelligence, anything that left that office was classified secret. All right. So, and in order to communicate with our headquarters in Frankfurt, we had to use, this is the old days, teletype. There was a punched paper band that they did to encrypt the data and the transmission that you had to sync up. We had a little room in our offices that had a lead chamber in it where the teletype was.
Wow.
So that Ivan couldn't pick up the transmissions and the vibrations from the building and the windows in order to decode all of these things. So part of my job is to simply go around to the other German agencies and say hello and, you know, how you doing and what's going on. And just north of Bad Hersfeld was the rail crossing from the east. That means anybody that was leaving East Germany and coming to West Germany had to go through Bavela in this thing. Well, the East Germans were just like everybody else that ever rides a train. When you're done with your newspaper, you just leave it on the seat. You don't throw it away. You don't take it with you. You just leave it laying there. So they would collect these East German newspapers. And when we showed up, like once a week, they'd hand us a bunch of them and go, here, we can pick these up off the train. You're probably very interested in this, which I was. I'd go back to the office and I'd read what they were written in the East German newspapers. Well, anyhow, this was intelligence. So I had a type of form and attach the newspapers to this form and send them to Munich to the 18th MI battalion, which was our translation battalion. And they had 200 GIs down there that all they did was translate whatever they found in German. So they would translate these East German newspapers into English. Well, in order to send them out, they had to be classified secret. So I would sit in my office with a newspaper and a stamp that said secret so that I could stamp them at the top and bottom of every page of a newspaper that everybody has read for I don't know how long, from wherever, so it could leave the office, get into the system, get translated, and it takes 20 years to go from secret to confidential, another 20 years to go from confidential to for official use only, and another 20 years after that to become declassified, which means most of those newspapers are still classified in the American system somewhere. And I'm going, okay, anybody can read them, you know. But they are a brilliant source of intelligence.
Sure.
Because they tell you that's actually how that's how MI got its start, is the office of OSS back in the Second World War. And their primary means of intelligence gathering was measuring column inches of newspapers. They would just mention, you know, they would get a category, they're talking about food. How many column inches were devoted to food in this edition? And by measuring column inches, you could tell what's going on and what's important and what are they trying to keep people calm about. It's brilliant. As a matter of fact, John Nesbitt's book Megatrends, which was a real big hit back in the 80s, because he was one of these first future forecaster kind of types and came up with these 10 big trends. And that's exactly what he did. He used that method, and his consulting firm simply measured column inches of newspapers. And he made billions.
So it didn't matter what the content was.
The content isn't important. The theme, the topic is important. What they're saying doesn't matter. It's how, you know.
It was a precursor to tags.
Yes.
Today.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
The precursor. Yeah. And what we do now
Tags
is
and weighted tags. So it would be.
Well, that too. But you see, the weighting comes from how many people will use it.
Oh, and how many inches? Oh, okay, I was thinking.
Right. Right, but the tag itself, we provide the tags now. We We don't say, you don't have to go make, don't go make up your own categories. I'll give you the categories.
Well, it's like the cloud, like, or a speech or any, how many times did he mention,
Yes.
what's the word now?
Right.
Corroborated.
Yeah. For example.
Mentioned corroborated 20 times in his speech. So that was the most important thing.
Yes, yes.
He was talking
and
about.
we use these words. And if you really want to do an interesting exercise, I did this when I was when I took my last degree at the British University. I learned a long time ago, the people will tell you what's bothering them. You only have to listen to them, because they will. So maybe the speechwriter does use corroboration a lot, it could be. But if you take a scientific article, and once you've gone through and checked all of the tables of data and realize that most of them don't foot, you know, you can count up all of the rows and get a sum, and then sum the sums, and it doesn't add up to the sums that are across the bottom. That happens more often than you would think. But take the article and run it through something like Wordle. And Wordle will give you a graphic. You ever see one of these where there's all these words together and some of them are big and some of them are smaller or whatnot? Well, there's a program online where you can run things through, and it shows you graphically with a very nice picture what's being talked about. It takes out all of the articles and the indefinite articles and the adjectives and one. It's just, you know, highlights the nouns. And then you realize, well, the guy wrote the article about A, but actually he's talking about B. And you can demonstrate quantitatively, which a lot of academics just love.
I want to add something though, that all those little throwaway words there.
Yeah.
It's actually part of what I was just going for funding about that didn't get funding for.
Oh, really?
Was to do analysis on this on websites. To collect the data from the website web crawl.
Yeah.
On sites that I had curated, and then use there's a guy named Pennebaker who's developed this, and his team have developed a kind of state-of-the-art assessment of quantitative text analysis.
Mm-hmm.
But what he's discovered is that all those little words actually really matter. They tell you a lot about.
Well, you mean like adjectives and adverbs?
Not those so much, but the prepositions and the pronouns.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
Okay. Well, they gave you
some point, counterpoint. I'm just adding to what you're saying.
Okay. No, that's fine. That's fine. I wanted to know which ones, because, you know, some languages don't have indefinite articles, for example. So it's real hard to, you know, to say, oh, well, they didn't use any. Well, okay, they don't have them. They can't, so they can't, you know.
Yeah, a lot of cross-cultural research. I'm not
right, but we do use prepositions and we do use reference and whatnot. I would be interested to see when something like that gets developed for languages like German or French that have
he may
genders.
Have it, actually.
You know, have genders associated with their nouns.
Well, they can predict the gender of the writer based on their word usage. So that's what ties us to our
Okay.
that we were talking about. For example, over large like our initial topic was about the Supreme Court and the gender dynamics, and so it turns out if you take a really large sample, for example, that women use more first person pronouns than men do. That's one finding that's very robust, and so there are gender differences that show up, and so I was anyway, and also this is also available online. So Wordle, I didn't know about that, and this guy has his stuff online.
Yeah, I think it's called Wordle.net. You can paste any text in there, you know, and it gives you really nice and then you can play with the graphics, and you know, I used to make them very, very dynamic and colorful so that I could paste them in as images in the papers I turned in. It really aggravated my tutor, but
okay.
I think that's why I continued to do it.
Just to say, one other thing that I found helpful about this Pennebaker stuff is that they've got a measure for authenticity.
Oh, yeah?
So they've got some way of inferring whether the voice, like of the writer, is authentic or not, or whether they're hedging So,
Do you have a link somewhere? Can you post a link?
it's called Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count.
Okay.
LIWC. Since we're into very arcane stuff, and the guy's name is Pennebaker, and he's an American social psychologist. So yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to link back to the other topic, but
I didn't mean to get us off there. I just
no, just to throw in. I mean, I've heard heard stories of like AI kind of technology, linguistic analysis that can be predictive of like suicidality, for example. But I mean, couldn't you just you could that's really what Google and Facebook and Twitter are also doing. I mean, they're using big data linguistic analysis essentially to to tweak to feed their algorithms and their machine learning around feeding ads and around customizing what you see and so forth. I mean, and
there's something like different styles and approaches to text analysis or something. Like it's a huge in of itself. So.
Well, I'm just wondering, like, it's another level of, or another lens on a phenomena. So if we were to look at something like the Kavanaugh hearings, we could follow the stories, what he said, what she said, what they want, but you could also, maybe if you look at the text analysis, if there were another vantage on it, you could see what it's really, not what it's really about, but what it's about on a subliminal level, like not what they're saying ostensibly, but what they're really talking about. And I mean, obviously we don't have access to doing that, but I wonder if there's a way that we just with our own intuition could get at what is that really about, aside from the politics of it and aside from the facts or uncertainty or uncertitude with respect to the facts. What's it really about? And I think that's what Mark was getting at in the beginning with the idea that it's about consciousness and about memory, and certainly the sexual dynamics is like the underlying sexual dynamics.
Yeah, essentially, or ultimately, if you like that word, Marco, it's about behavior that people did 37 years ago, and then trying to make a judgment on people's memory of behaving from 37 years ago, which is incredible. Yeah, now they use all these analytics, and the woman who asked the questions to Ford, she's supposed to be a professional expert on interpreting the responses she gets from the person she's I'd call it's more like an interview. She wasn't really prosecuting her. And then, but one of the things that I was fascinated with was not only the vocal, the intonation, what they said, the words they used, but also their in a broad sense, body language, and the voice inflection, and all things you can't get from a transcript. And with all the the psychology and the analytics today, people are coached in eliciting the response from the other party that they want to get, like with Ford, and she being a psychologist. I'll tell you this: if I was a student and she was my professor, I'd drop the class after one class. It's just like, get me out of here. which is basically what I did in graduate school. Quitting graduate school, I did. The professors were unimpressive. The whole department, the whole thing was just so unimpressive. I just said, I might as well take my money and flush it down the toilet. Obviously, I could have learned a few things, but not for the price. It was just ridiculous. So I quit and eventually opened a bookstore, which
Well, that's a problem you have in a free market economy.
There you go.
Really, because all it does in the end is drives up the price.
But yeah, the thing to me about that hearing was watching, the personalities and the back and forth. It was just fascinating to see with so much at stake.
But whatever you thought of her personally, there are facts. Like something happened or didn't happen. There is a truth, and epistemologically or psychologically, we may not be able to know it exactly or prove it, beyond reasonable doubt. But let's just abstract away from the particulars. Like if it were the case that this event happened, that this assault took place, are you arguing that wouldn't be, that wouldn't be relevant to whether or not somebody is, like a candidate is qualified or, it should be on that, should play that role? Like, does having, like, what's your thinking on that? Like, because it seems like you want to say that because it was a long time ago, it is no longer relevant.
Well, I sort of lean towards Kavanaugh's argument, which he didn't actually state it coherently, but what I took it to mean is, look at my record, look at my job. I think probably he drinks a lot, but apparently, if he leans towards alcoholism, he's a functional alcoholic and an extremely good one. You couldn't possibly get where he is if he couldn't do the job that was required of him to do. And so, and I'm a 15, 16 years older than he is, and she is. In other words, my high school experience goes back to the mid-60s. And so I can relate sort of to the parties I was involved, that sort of situation. Of course, I wasn't a prep kid in, the DC area, so I don't know that culture. I wasn't in college. I was not a fraternity type person. So, I only have my own experience, but it was the culture in the mid-60s, not the 80s. And I heard it referred to as the culture of those movies, Animal House and the Fast Times at Ridgemont High and things like that. Yeah, I was a parent in the 80s. I was doing, I was 30 some years old when they were teenagers. So I don't know. If he's an alcoholic now, that's a problem.
Yeah, but you're saying that he can do the job. So if he, committed this assault, it's not relevant to.
That's sort of my position.
Okay.
If he was doing that now, if he was, sexually assaulting women now, That's a problem. Just like if he drinks too much now and he can't do his job, that's a problem. But I don't know.
So let's say, I mean, all right. I don't want to. I could respond, but what do you think, Durwin? Ed?
I don't know what it actually means to do one's job in that context. There were judges in Texas who have decided that rich white kids suffer from affluenza. This is not a medical, right? And they get off. So they're doing their job, but this job is heinous. This job has nothing to do with justice anymore. It has nothing to do with equality before all of those things. Let's say that a Supreme Court justice should stand for. So is that doing your job? That's just doing a job that may or may not be passable where you are.
That's different. I sort of laid it out in the beginning of our cafe of the Supreme Court. And what they do is one of the conservative arguments is liberal judges create new laws, and the conservative position is they go on precedent.
Which is also not true. Kavanaugh, for example, is on record as saying that the President of the United States is above the law. And that is, for 200 years or 275 years of American history, not the case. The precedence has been established that the president is also subject to the laws of the land. So he has a position that is basically untenable with the job he's applying for. And what bothers me is that we're talking about what might have happened 40 years ago instead of truly, whether he's legally and psychologically, mentally suited to be in a position to make those kinds of decisions. So once again, we're really missing the point, which happens so often in a lot of what goes on in America, because the side issues take precedence over the major ones. We don't know. There's been no discussion on his real positions on points of law, which should be the subject of the inquiries or the interview.
Which apparently the guy has written over 300 opinions. So there is a record of his legal mind. And that's,
I agree.
And apparently he's by the standards, he's qualified because he's what they call it, the second highest court in the land, the DC Court of Appeals he has this huge record in the legal profession. Now, I don't hold lawyers in high esteem. I've known a few, and I've been, but in their profession, they're smart, they have intellect, but they deal in conflict, but they deal in verbal conflict, and as opposed to fisticuffs or firearms or bows and arrows, knives and things like that.
That would be my concern for you, is if this, and what I'm hearing is partly what your main concern would be if someone shows up with jackboots coming for you, right? So
I haven't given it a lot of concern.
Okay, not that you're afraid about this every morning when you wake up, but just go with me for a second, okay? So then you've got this judge saying, okay, hey, the president's above the law. Then so if that's his position, then you're starting to erode the safety framework of the Constitution that keeps that happening for you. It keeps you safe. So you end up putting yourself in risk.
If it were, now we're playing word games. If it were
That's not my intention, but
I know, but you said,
I'm just trying to follow.
you said Kavanaugh's position is the president is above the law.
I said that.
Yeah.
That's an and he echoed it. That's an interpretation.
Not when he says the president is above the law. That's not an interpretation. When his words are, the president is above the law, that's not an interpretation, Mark. Those are Kavanaugh's words. So,
well,
and that has been a statement.
Well, so we could go back to when Trump said in the campaign, I could shoot somebody out on Fifth Avenue. And
He was absolutely correct. He could have. He was right. The statement was factually true. I believe he could have. It wouldn't have mattered a bit. It wouldn't have made a bit of difference.
you don't really believe that.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I believe that.
I think he was making a point.
Well, he was, but I think it is also literally true. If you look and listen to what most of his supporters are saying, most of the time, they'd give him a bye. They're willing.
But that doesn't mean.
Wait a second. Wait a minute. They're willing to excuse us about anything he does or says, and they're also willing to actively willing to find ways to justify that. He said of Nazis, there are good people on both sides. He said some Nazis are okay. His supporters find that okay. It's not okay. It's just not okay. I live in a country where that is a huge problem historically and currently. But America apparently has no problem with it. That's a problem.
I think oddly enough, and I'm sorry, Marco, I think oddly enough, we got to the crux of this huge conflict in the USA, and that's that Ed takes the position that literally Trump, during the campaign, could have shot somebody on Fifth Avenue out in front of Trump Hotel, and the police would not have arrested him.
Oh, I don't believe he could have been arrested, but he would not have been convicted, and he wouldn't have gone to jail for it. And he would still be able to run. They would find a judge who would say, well, in this case, just doing his job, because maybe I'll be appointed as a Supreme Court judge someday, maybe by this guy as well, that doesn't really count towards his campaign. And we do a lot of that kind of thing in smaller scales, of course.
Okay. And I will...
We're simply taking it to extreme for illustrative purposes.
Well, sort of. I did a podcast last week. After the last Café, I went into Denver and did a podcast with a couple of fellas. And it's my position that what you're talking about, you know, letting someone get away with murder, I take it back to the O.J. Simpson trial. And that's when that happened in real life. A guy who was committed maybe one of the most horrible crimes in history, and they did the whole legal system did its thing, and the jury said not guilty.
I don't think that's the first time that somebody.
I don't think that's the first time either.
Well, it was the first time. It was a confluence because it was the first time that was open to the world, that it was seen. It was cable TV was just starting, and it sort of launched the modern era of what's going on.
We were able to witness it.
I think, yeah. I mean, I think that what Ed is talking about is that American culture has gotten into a climate where anything goes. And I think that's also the significance of these allegations against Kavanaugh, because we're kind of in this schizophrenic moment where on the one hand anything goes, and Trump could literally or metaphorically shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and get away with it. And we could have these hearings in the Senate that focus on. I'm not going to say that they're not important, but they may not be about the substance of the legal requirements of the job. I don't know if it doesn't seem that the way that Supreme Court justices are picked is not by their specific positions, but by the quality of their reasoning. I think that there's a debate about litmus test, right? Should there be a litmus test for candidates if they hold a particular position? Because I mean, the essence of a problem that goes before the Supreme Court is that it doesn't have a definite solution. The solution has to be arrived at through deliberation and through interpretation. And then, more conservative judges tend to interpret things more literally with respect to the Constitution, or literalistically. Whereas more progressives or liberal judges tend to be more focused on context. So how would these principles or these rules articulated 250 years ago apply now? And obviously there has to be a balance between them, because if they were really just making up the laws, then there'd be no point in having a constitution. On the other hand, the Constitution was written in a way to be open-ended, to be open to interpretation, because they were dealing with fundamental conflicts, fundamental irreconcilable or irreducible conflicts in the body politic. But I think that there's another layer to this, which is that because it's the Supreme Court, because the individuals are on there for life and they can't be removed, that I'm aware of. I don't know if there's never heard of impeachment for a judge.
It can't happen. It can't.
Okay, they can, but I think the question is, one question I would bring to it is the quality of reasoning enough? Is that a sufficient criteria for somebody to be in that position? Because they're making decisions which, they may not all affect you personally, Mark, but they're going to affect millions of people. And so I think an argument can be made that a person appointed to that position, whether their reasoning leans conservative or liberal, but something about their character, something about the quality of their person as demonstrated through the course of their whole life, not just their professional career, should be central to deciding whether or not they get to play that role, because they have to reflect the interests, needs, rights, freedoms, the whole integral being of the population as a whole. And I think I think he probably did it. I think I've known guys like him. I think he's a type. He's an individual, but it's very easy to see this kind of frat boy, very privileged, very intelligent, very ambitious, success oriented, but also, whose path is greased, let's just say, by connections, friends, family, etc. And I listened to her testimony. I listened to a bit of his. My own opinion is that I don't think, just because something happened a long time ago doesn't mean you don't remember it, and doesn't mean you couldn't remember it accurately, and doesn't mean that it doesn't still live inside of you very in a very, very real way. So I don't so much buy the statute of limitations argument there. I think we have to look at his character. And, take somebody like Obama for contrast. Nothing like this ever occurred around Obama. How come never was there, even as much as people disagreed with his ideas, as much as people thought that he was, a socialist or a communist or a Marxist or whatever it is, bad for America. Even Republicans said he's a good guy.
He let the never mind. That would take us off topic.
I think as a question of character, that Clinton would be the opposite. Clinton is another kind of Kavanaugh figure. He got away with a lot, and he shouldn't have. And I think that part of what Americans want is they want accountability, they want responsibility. They don't want to live in a situation where anything goes. because this is what's leading this country down the tubes. There's all right. You're laughing. You're laughing. I mean, I don't want to get too moralistic. There's about it, but I mean, really, there has to be sort of response. There has to be a culture of responsibility, at least in the government, at least on the Supreme Court. Like if we have Hollywood and we have Las Vegas and we have a lot of other places in America where anything can go, but anything should not go in in our governance. Is that a radical point of view?
No, you're talking about health, just to be developmental, you're talking about healthy amber in a sense, character bedrock of values.
I think character matters.
Well, I do too, Marco. I don't think that it's irrelevant. See,
don't go away thinking that I think it's irrelevant. I think.
No, I didn't think that you thought it was irrelevant. I was merely emphasizing the fact that it does play a role, and it's not an inconsequential role.
And that's what I think we were seeing. Now, I tend to think of character and personality as sort of the same thing. And I put the three of them, you're talking about the same thing. Soul, personality, character. You're basically talking about who a person is, and most people don't know who they are. And I think Kavanaugh, what I saw was a person who's coming face to face with who he is, and he doesn't necessarily like it. In other words, I saw a reaction from him that I think you're right, Marco. I think if he didn't do that particular thing, yes, he was that type that you're describing. And yeah, these are not, they were not friends of mine. I didn't run in that circle, but I've always been an outlier, no matter, and rather that I attribute it to being in the military brat. I call it global nomad syndrome. Mm-hmm. But then my brother's the exact opposite. So you can't blame it on growing up in the military, bouncing around from place to place. It's something deeper than that. Our personalities, my brother and I, vastly different. And yeah, I don't particularly think highly of Kavanaugh, and I don't think highly of Ford either. Both of them,
That's the argument Katina is making on the other side. It's probably not an argument I would make, or that,
What argument is Katina making? That it doesn't.
She's more. I wish she were here; she could make it herself. But she's more critiquing, women who put themselves in situations or who act in ways that are more risky, let's say, or more inviting situations where something like what Kavanaugh may or may not have done, probably do, can happen. I read an article in Boulder, Colorado, the student newspaper, the student magazine called Rooster, but it was about it was written by a young woman who had lived in a frat house for like her 4 years. Like her boyfriend was in the fraternity, and she wrote about how horrifying it was now upon reflection after the fact, that the hazing they would do and the abuse that they would do and the way that they would, manipulate situations to isolate the women and, assault
Can you
them.
give a time? Is this now?
This would be in the last 15, 20 years, I guess, 10 years or so. I think she's writing remembering her experience. She's writing after the fact. I didn't get the details of when it was, but she was living in a frat house voluntarily. She apparently had her own dorm or her own living arrangements, and then the older frat members would come in and molest her and stuff, and then her boyfriend couldn't protect because he was lower on the totem pole. Again, I'm not going to make. I mean, I think that it goes both. It's not just men oppressing women, and I think that like it takes two, and that's not to say that there aren't. That's not to say it's right, and that's not to say that there aren't definite situations where there's a predator-prey dynamic, and because of societal norms or because of the situation, one really is a victim. So I don't want to discount real victimhood, but it gets complicated in situations like that. And I don't, the Christine Ford, she seemed like a very mild person, a very intellectual. She didn't seem like a party girl. So I'm not sure how that happened. Of course, this
did you see her yearbook?
No, I missed it.
Yeah, you can't take the behavior out of the context, out of the culture. Like I said, I can only, go back to my own high school and college, and I did not run in those circles. Now, could I have? This free will thing.
So knowing that you didn't run in those circles, then how do you relate that to being comfortable with Kavanaugh being appointed when it would be hard for you to really know who he is because you didn't run in those circles?
Well, I don't want the job. Marco doesn't want the job. Who wants that job? Those type of people.
There's a very relative aspect to all of this. I did belong to a fraternity in college, but back when I was in college,
yeah, you and I are the same
age. So I went off to college in 1967. That was my September 67 was my start in college, and things were very different then. That's why when this girl says she lived in a fraternity house, when I was there, women had a 12 o'clock curfew on the weekends and had to be back in the dorm.
Well, and the dorms were separate. Now they have
the dorms were separate. Now they're co-ed. So a lot of things have changed in that regard because of pressures that come from one side. But I've never, even though I was in a fraternity, I went to a rather rural university. It wasn't anything. It was nothing close or comparable to Ivy League, and so that's a whole of things that come up there. So there may be similarities. There are a lot of differences. There are people, but it's the same kind of dynamics that we always have all the time. And I think one of the things about being educated is being able to say, oh, I don't have to specifically have been a rich kid at an Ivy League school and belonging to a fraternity to have experienced certain things that would be comparable or that I can understand, that I might be able to understand. We had also, different kinds of fraternities had their own characters. The one I belonged to was more like Animal House than but when you look at it, they were all pretty harmless in the end. But there's also a not so harmless version of that. There's just people that are always high, drunk, or whatnot. They're glad to get through their 4 years and come out whole. And maybe later they do change. I did too. My grad work, I did very well. I barely got out of my undergraduate work. But I wouldn't say, well, that was just because I worked hard and got ahead and improved my character or whatnot. It's just, at some point, some of us grow up and realize, a little bit of hard work doesn't hurt. And, it can be helpful at times, and maybe you learn something. And then, I've lots of nice. How about the other one? But, it's people do change. But once the actions start bordering on or getting into what is criminal, we could talk all night about what rape actually is, but I firmly believe there can't be a statute of limitations on a crime like that, because the victim in that case, be they male or female, will suffer those consequences forever. So if those consequences are always there, how can I say legally they don't count? You see, we've just made an arbitrary distinction about how it is with us human beings, and maybe we need to be rethinking those kinds of things. And those would be worthwhile discussions to be having, and those would be worthwhile topics to be investigating further. But we don't do that, because we like to make it cut and dry, and we like to make it very rational, and we like to say, okay, why is there no statute of limitations on murder? Why? Well, because it makes sense that we shouldn't. It's wrong to take the life of another person, period. So we don't have that.
It seems like we have some agreement that context is very important. That seems to be, yeah, okay. I'm just looking for the links here.
Well, that could be a very challenging job with us, Durwin.
Keeping up with the context.
Yeah, keeping up with the connection.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's context, but what Ed is saying, I think, is really poignant. I mean, crime is a crime, rape is rape, and whether
yeah,
there's always context where it happens. Maybe there's alcohol involved. Maybe there's been risky decisions involved, or whatever. Still, there's a line that gets crossed when that becomes a crime. And that's another kind of conversation, I think, than all the other kinds of trauma that would be associated with unmindful sex, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, maybe those are different conversations. Clearly they would have different implications for like a Supreme Court justice or for anybody. But I think the more, I mean, if we'll all grant that point, then I mean, I think the more interesting conversation is around those edge cases, or the fuzzier areas where it really is about human psychology and about our development, because people who are more developed, or people who have better character, won't act in the ways that like Kavanaugh apparently did. And maybe not in this particular, it's a pattern, right, of behavior. It's not just a one incident that we're talking about.
There's a few women who've come forward, yeah.
And it's not just I wouldn't say it's even disconnected from probably other ways that he behaves. His anger or whatever it is tied up with a psychology of power, maybe, a psychology of privilege, maybe. I'm not such a fan of that whole discourse, but I don't think it's false. And you can see it in how people behave and how people talk. And he, Kavanaugh talks differently than Sotomayor, right? Their minds are, their psychologies are different, partly because of their embodiment in a society that, has certain structures or certain cultural features relating to sex and gender and power. And I think it's it's a hard conversation to have, because it's so loaded, and because it's so easy to get your head bit off for saying the slightest wrong thing. And I think we have to, I've shied away from the conversation in many ways, just because even to get it started on the right foot is difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Very easy to go off the rails.
Well, when the list of about five or seven or something finalists for the seat was put forth, and of course I didn't interview any of the people, I would have preferred the woman that Trump was considering. And I think that will be, if Kavanaugh goes down, he'll probably move to the woman. And that would have been my first choice. But what do I know? I don't. But yeah, I don't like what I've seen with Kavanaugh. Like I said, I'd have a beer with Ed, and Marco and I have shared beers, and I'd even have one with Durwin. But Kavanaugh, no, he wouldn't be on my short list to have a beer with.
You have a beer with the Canadian?
What?
You have a beer with the Canadian?
Sure, I have Canadian friends, by golly. You're not the only person I know who lives in Canada.
Maybe that, okay.
Got some good beer up there too.
Yeah, for sure.
Lots of craft.
They actually have beer up there.
Well, it's probably not German standards, but.
You'd be surprised how close it can get. There is one beer in America that is brewed according to German purity laws. One. Sam Adams.
Okay.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of craft beer. I actually don't drink much beer, but there is a lot of craft.
And a lot of the craft brewers tend to honor that tradition because they realize that's actually how you get. If you're into drinking beer for the sake of drinking beer, you don't care. But if you drink beer because you enjoy beer, because it's where I happen to be living now, it's a food, so I care where I get my schnitzel and where I get my steaks, and I also care which beer I put into my body. So we make those kinds of decisions. My brother is a zymurgist. He brews his own, and he spends a lot of time, and his son is now picking that up, and he's taking it to a whole new level and using techniques that were too time consuming for my brother even, but it's all about the beer in the end. And it really is. And he's had lots of festivals. I'm always amazed because he says when people come over, they talk about the beer. These are, they could be military people, but they talk about the beer because it becomes a subject matter. When it's really good, it's something to talk about. It's a beauty to behold.
We're just about to legalize cannabis. Like it's very, so, yeah.
And I believe that's a step in the right direction because there will then, and this is one of the, the other side of the coin, there will be products that are then presented that people will talk about and they'll think about because it makes a difference whether it's this or that or whatnot. And it doesn't have to be something that matters centrally in one's life, but it's good to talk about things that matter to one because they affect one. And that's, to me, good practice for other things like Supreme Court justices then. Because at least you've had some experience talking about things that you think matter. And you've thought about, well, why does this matter to me? Right. There are certain beers, for example, that I would never, ever drink with certain foods. It just wouldn't cross my mind. And if somebody said, you have to drink this, well, I drink it, but I wouldn't do it because it's going to ruin the meal or it'll ruin the beer. That beer in another context would be a whole different story.
So Supreme Court Justice notorious for mismatching fermented beverages with.
Well, really, because he only ever talked about beer,
Is this like a stain on their character?
Well, yeah. If you don't honor what it is that you're imbibing, I think you need to revisit your values. And I think character matters.
You can work this into Cosmos because, it's about aesthetics, right? And if Kavanaugh doesn't like beer, then his aesthetics are really, really suck, and he should not be,
I think aesthetics matter.
I do too. I think they matter a whole lot.
I think. You're talking about the good life. You're talking about an orientation around a good life.
Yeah.
What are we doing all this for? Why are we dealing with all this crap?
Mm-hmm.
Sickness, death, old age.
Yeah.
If we can't enjoy a good beer, a good meal, a good conversation, and what I would want from our government, and from people who
I think
serve.
I see a joke coming,
Well,
at least something I'm going to laugh at.
I don't know about that, but um, it's not that hard. I mean, there's incredible depth in brew, but it's not that hard to have a good life.
No.
I don't think that it should be so hard
Yes.
to coexist, to be certified even for our coexistence.
Mhm.
To go along, get along, enjoy the good things in life, and there's not that. I mean, there doesn't have to be that much more than that.
It
Um, but
seems
what?
simple enough.
Well, no. I mean, I don't want to be. I'm not trying. It may sound naive, but like part of what happens with these, power, ambition, power, is that it overcomplicates things, because you have a class of people that want a lot more, that can't, that want something that are missing the point, I guess, of life. Uh, and I mean, I think that that's where character comes in, is because part of cultivating character is, and I'm just thinking out loud here, like, but
Mark,
it's coming into a balance with life.
class issues, right? You're segueing a little bit from gender to class and money and that kind of piece, right?
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, I think that that's mixing into it.
No, we can do that.
I mean, I well,
Just
I don't think so.
like
I don't
we-
think so.
No? Okay, because we've
No.
been 90 minutes.
I'll,
we
I'll
could
tell
do-
you why.
We still haven't done our money one, Café.
I haven't done that. It is also necessary. I agree with you, Durwin. But it doesn't have to.
Start that.
It doesn't have to be a matter of money and what. Tomorrow is a holiday in Germany, for example. It's the day of German unity. And since it's a holiday, it's like a Sunday. And so tomorrow we're going to have a Sunday meal. And my daughter went out and she got duck breasts that I get to make, of course. And we're going to have potato dumplings and red cabbage with that. Okay? It seems those are very simple staples. In this part of Germany where I live, potato dumplings and red cabbage, there are some people that have it every Sunday. Okay? We don't. But we're going to have this. And we're going to have with this, I know now because this is what my family has told me, we're going to have a very simple Macedonian rosé table wine. And I'm talking a very simple wine. This is $1.49 a liter. Okay, it is the cheapest wine in the beverage market. And it is the one that my family loves. This is the perfect wine with, you don't know if you're red or white. There's no wine culture in that sense. It's simply, this is what we like, and we enjoy potato dumplings and red cabbage. And sometimes we'll have, a stuffed steak with that. Sometimes we'll have a pork roast with that, and tomorrow it's going to be duck. It's actually very special because we hardly ever had duck. For my birthday every year, since it's close to Christmas time, we go to a local restaurant in the next village down the road, and we eat roast goose with dumplings and red cabbage because that's what I like on my birthday. But
Thomas More wrote that book, Care of the Soul, right? Which was all about
yes,
Epicurean. Yeah.
And there is a certain truth to that.
And there was a guy on the platform who's distanced a little bit that was into that too. Do you remember? He was like a high-powered CEO guy.
Jim Tratner, maybe?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking of other people.
That's correct. But it's in the end, it's what you like and how you decide to organize it. This is I'm coming back to what Marco was saying about the aesthetics of it. This is a personal family aesthetic of ours. We have, it's not a formal dinner, but we feel formal about it,
right?
Because it's Sunday. It's a Sunday dinner. and we actually sit down at the table with a different attitude than we do during the week. And I enjoy that very much. We have long talks afterwards. I'll open another bottle. At $149 a bottle, I can afford to open a couple of them, you know, when we're having dinner. And we'll sit around and we'll talk and we'll engage and we'll interact. But that's the aesthetics of that. And so there are certain points in our lives where that comes to the fore, but it doesn't have to be classy in that regard. It has to be what those who are involved identify with and respond to. That's the central part, and that's part of finding out who we are and who we interact with. That's why I would very much, a little difficult to do because Scotty can't beam me over, to sit down somewhere and have a beer with Mark. You know, just that in and of itself would be a worthy event, because we would sit down and we would talk face to face in the same way that we do here online, but we'd get a lot more out of it, simply because of the close interaction of sitting at the same table and having a beer, that kind of thing. You know, so that's what gets lost here in the online part of it. But it's a matter of defining and developing one's own aesthetics of what it is worth to do if one has the opportunity. And I don't think we think enough about those kinds of things every.
Well, I think to try and bring it back to, if there is a central theme, I think the four of us probably take that for granted. And a lot of people, unfortunately, still here in the USA and probably Canada too, struggle with it. And I think everybody's familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. A lot of you can only enjoy what you're talking about, Ed and Marco, once you have those first, you're at the love and belongingness level, which is the third in the hierarchy. A lot of people struggle at the first and second level, and those are the people who are screaming now the loudest. They don't feel safe and secure, and their basic physiological needs they struggle. So it's hard to get that that sense that you're talking about if those first two aren't met.
Yep, that's right.
And to go to the Supreme, Kavanaugh's been challenged, and a lot of people now in this country, their self-esteem is being challenged, questioned, which just tears people apart because they think of themselves as this type of person. And people are coming up to them and say, no, you're not. You're scum or whatever. And that fractures people's sense of self. And that's why this thing is exploded. This thing being, the last, since the election, the campaign, all of that. People's sense of self. And it's so in your face with the phone and the screens and all that, it's just, everything is being shattered.
Talking about the mean postmodern meme right now, is that kind of the mean version of social justice activism? Is that it's sort of tearing down people's self-esteem? Is that what you're getting at there?
Well, all of these people in power, no matter which side of the political spectrum, in the media, all these people thought of themselves as highly respected, esteemed positions. In other words, they were riding along at level 4 of Maslow's hierarchy. And now with everybody's got a phone, everybody's got a reporter, everybody's a reporter, everybody's got an opinion. You get the world anywhere in the world. It's just overwhelming. And people, the structure, the hierarchy of human interaction is being challenged.
Yep.
It's messy, but maybe it's a good thing.
Yeah, I think people thought that all along. It's just that the people that were in those, let's say, elevated positions didn't know that the others thought that way, because it wasn't in your face like it, like it is now.
Well, that's
everybody has it, and everybody can say it.
Everything is in your face now.
Yeah,
and you may, people with less may have been very happy with what you're talking about, Ed, sitting around the kitchen table, maybe just having some cheese and bread. That's all they could afford. But now they see these other people living way, and people like Kavanaugh, it's just like, who the are these people? Who do they think they are?
I think we're talking about money and wealth now, right? So do we want to? We're kind of segueing into money and wealth and class.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know if we want to do that in this conversation, or we could.
I think it's worth its own conversation, honestly.
Yeah,
there's a lot there. Maybe,
it is.
Do you want to set it up, Durwin? Like maybe frame a question? Not for next week, maybe, because we're doing this for next week.
But part of it is
I gotta go with money.
Everything always trickles back down to sex at the root of everything. In other words, who are you allowed to have sex with?
Well, or you could go the other way. You could say everything trickles down to money, or that it's a double trickle down. But yeah, okay.
Well, but you're talking about kind of the evolutionary biological level.
I always get back to
he always gets, sooner or later he gets there.
I smuggle it in.
Evolutionary biology? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yes, I've got to go earn some money, but in principle, I'm interested in a cafe about money.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. It's next week. There definitely will be a cafe. There will be a topic for it. It'll be on the calendar. Jeffrey, Heather, and myself are going to practice our presentation for the Gebser conference.
That'll be fun.
Event. By the way, that's in 2 weeks, and you could.
Is that a drinking game? Every time you say integral, we take a shot.
Hey, I used to have a T-shirt. Okay, this is a joke. Okay, about me. But I had a T-shirt my wife gave me. Marco, you'll appreciate this too. At least you'll appreciate it. My wife gave me a T-shirt, kind of tongue-in-cheek, kind of giving me a message. Aquaholic.
Aqua. Wilbur. Yeah. You know this, right, Mark? Okay.
Even I got it.
Right.
Partially recovered.
All right. Well, this was kind of about Kavanaugh. We did some digressions into.
Well, there's potentially a topic about alcohol, drugs, and recovery, if that's needed or not, and all that. That's another topic.
Yeah, that is.
Which is a big topic and very.
Well, another thing that is circling around this, another topic is, and you guys had in one of the platforms, rooms, whatever, something about who decides. I think that's a part of this is who decides, who makes the rules, who has the power, and be it sex. I mean, money is almost like a gun. It's a great equalizer. If you got a lot of money, you can buy things. You can buy sex. You can damn near buy happiness. You can get pretty close if you got a lot of money. So I forgot my train.
The first robot brothel is is going to open up in Texas.
Where
They're
else?
trying to get.
Apparently,
Germany or Japan.
Well,
That would have
not
been
the
my
first in the
second
world.
guess.
Not the first in the world, but I guess it's a new thing in the U.S. And there was a patent that recently expired. That there was a patent troll who had devised like what teledildonics is the technical term for it, and so now like the field is open. The patent's expired. People can start building companies around this, and seeing the market opportunity. A company wants to open up a robotic brothel in Houston, Texas, which happens to be really lax with its zoning laws. So I read that this was in my face when I opened up my my news app today. Speaking about buying happiness.
searching for that. That was just.
Well, there was a boy, we could go and there was a book written in 2007 called Love and Sex with Robots, and the Japanese, I said Japan because the Japanese are on the leading edge of developing the most human-like robots for intimacy.
For people like Brett Kavanaugh to assault.
No, for people like me who can't get along with real humans.
I bet 40 years from now, we'll be, assault on a robot will be the the issue, and it'll all be recorded. So it'll be there in the memory banks. All right, should we cut it?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, good.
Well, we've digressed that far.
Thanks, guys.
All right, it was real.
Have a good one. Hope you feel better, Ed.
Nah, I'll get there.
All right.
Take care.
No,
Bye-bye.
I'll get way out us through. Take care.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.